Now, this week, a court ruled Jim Karahalios should return or could return to the Conservative leadership race, arguing the party didn't use the proper means to kick him out. But before Karahalios could officially rejoin the race, the party did use the right channels to give him the boot again. This is all because one of the frontrunners of the race accused Karahalios of making racist remarks. For more on why he's being disqualified, I'm joined by Conservative Leadership Organizing Committee co-chair Dan Nolan. He's in Toronto, I believe. Hi, Dan. Good to see you.
Hi, Vashi. Good to see you.
So I just want to explain for our viewers really quickly that the decision that came down from the court ultimately said, and this is my interpretation, but I think the party had a similar interpretation, that basically the process wasn't unfair. Just ultimately the body that decided that to disqualify Mr. Karahalios was the wrong one. It had to be the Leadership Organizing Committee, of which you chair. And so that committee had to be the one to make that decision, which the committee did just yesterday. Why did the committee decide to disqualify Mr. Karahalios?
Yeah, that's a great point, Vashi. So the judge repeatedly in his motion went out of his way to say that the process afforded Mr. Karahalios was fair. The judge's ruling was, and it's quite well written. It's 56 pages, so I wouldn't expect people to wade into it. But it's a very narrow interpretation, basically saying that the appeals mechanism that is available to all candidates for the chief returning officer's ruling, that body isn't specifically afforded the right to exclude candidates, that right is only specifically afforded to the LEOC as a whole. So that subcommittee is actually all members of LEOC as well. So what the judge said in his ruling, and he said this, I counted 17 times in his ruling, that he said this is LEOC's role. LEOC should be the one to do this. LEOC should be the one to do this. So he repeatedly said that, and so that's why we met yesterday and made the decision that we did.
And is the decision? I mean, I read what the CR said as well. Ultimately, the first person to make the decision that Mr. Karahalios should have been disqualified, that's what he ended up appealing. Does that mean that you are in agreement? I mean, the CR said that he was race baiting with the emails that he did. Is that why? Like, are you in agreement with what the returning officer said?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you actually, what the chief returning officer actually, he actually fined Mr. Karahalios, and this is actually something that came up in the judge's ruling as well. And this is something that's, I think, is important for everybody to understand. Had Mr. Karahalios, and the judge makes a point of noting this, had he paid the fine that the chief returning officer had fined him, he would be a candidate today. Had he not, attacked the chair of one of the other campaigns overtly, he would be a candidate today. So at every stage, Mr. Karahalios is the one who, unfortunately, put himself in a situation where he can't be on the ballot, and it's disappointing for me, and it's disappointing, I think, for everyone that this has happened. We certainly didn't invite him into the leadership race for this to happen. So I think it's disappointing. It's disappointing for me as a conservative member, and I think it's disappointing for everybody that this unfortunately happened.
I just want to be clear, though. If he had paid that fine, would he still be a candidate, or
yes.
That's the only reason because he contends something?
He appealed the fine.
But he could have repaid it.
Well, the thing is, the members, it's a little technical, but the members of DRAC, the appeals body, yes, did not vote as part of LEOC the last time around. So what the judge was saying is that all the members of LEOC, including the members of DRAC, the appeals body, should vote on whether to expel Mr. Karahalios. So with those votes, together with the votes that were there to expel him anyway at the Leadership Election Committee, he was voted out. But had he not appealed it the first time around, the members of DRAC would not have voted. He could have been a member of the race going forward right now. Because, and he knows that. And it's unfortunate, again, and it's disappointing, but he made all these decisions all the way through.
Okay, so. and the point that the judge made, because I also read the decision, was that he knew the rules when he signed up for them. And I insofar as these bodies, this party does have the right to disqualify you for whatever, the set of reasons that are set out. And I asked him about that, and he said, his contention was that the rules are being applied to him differently. So, for example, Derek Sloan also made a comment that is widely condemned as racist when he questioned Dr. Theresa Tam's allegiance to this country and asked whether she was being loyal to China instead. But he was not disqualified from the race. That's what he responded to me with, and I'd like you to respond.
And the judge actually addressed that specific point in his ruling as well. And he said, firstly, any other candidates, that's not really relevant because this ruling is about Mr. Karahalios. Secondly, he said that there is no evidence that, and he repeatedly mentions this, there is no evidence that Mr. Karahalios has been treated unfairly or in any way differently than anyone else. And as we'd spoken about before, I'm not going to speak about whether, investigations that could be going on or might be going on, or if there's been complaints or anything like that until there's been a determination on everything else. So I would say that the judge spoke to that specific issue, and he was very, very clear that that was not the case. I
guess I take your point on what the judge said. I guess I'm asking you, beyond what the judge said, how you would respond. I mean, his basic argument is these guys had it out for me from the beginning. I'm an outsider. I'm an anti-establishment candidate, and this just speaks to why people like me will never be able to run for that position. The establishment is not necessarily, is basically out to get him.
Yeah, and I've heard him say that. But again, the judge addressed that as well in the ruling. And the judge was very, very specific about that he was even invited into, openly invited into the party. And the judge specifically referenced what was said to him during the candidate interview process, which I was part of. And we thanked him for participating. Look, I've been around politicians a lot, and I'm sure you have too. And anybody who wants to put their name on a ballot and put their family through that and go through the public scrutiny that comes with that, I think deserves a lot of respect. And so as part of that interview process, I specifically thanked him for putting himself through that. So we certainly were never out to get him. And it's entirely, again, Mr. Karahalios is the reason Mr. Karahalios is not in the race right now. Okay. There's no one else to blame but himself. And it's unfortunate. And I really, trust me, everyone's life would be a lot easier right now if he had not done the things he did to knock himself out of the race.
I just have a minute left, or a couple of minutes left, so I do want to switch gears and ask you about a story that broke this afternoon. I don't know if you're involved in the decision-making process, but I know that you are a party member. And I'm wondering how you feel about the idea that the Conservative Party is now taking advantage of accessing the federal wage subsidy program. I'm already hearing from a lot of people who are not able to access certain programs and thinking, why are political parties doing this? And especially the Conservatives who have been critical of the overall tally and how the government might have to pay it back. What do you think? What do the optics look like to you?
Well, I just actually found out about that a few minutes ago, so it's not really my say. I would say that, look, I think it's tough out there for, and I deal with it in my job on the banking front. It's tough for a lot of companies out there, a lot of charitable entities, and I think all those entities need to make their own decisions as how, what government programs, and there's seemingly a new one that comes out every day, how they're going to access them, what the best way to access them is. And so I can't really speak to that, unfortunately.
Sorry, I missed the last part of what you said. Pardon me.
I can't speak to it. I mean, all those organizations, charitable organizations, political parties, I happen to think they're important, and if they need that type of assistance, this is a difficult time for everybody. I mean, when we come out of this, I think there's going to be a lot of companies that are going to go bankrupt. A lot of charitable organizations that are going to have a real challenge, and it's difficult for all Canadians.
I take that point for sure, and I know that it's not you who made the decision, and you're telling me you just found out. But I think that given the amount of money that your party has raised, there are some valid questions as to why you would need government funds to pay those employees. Are you using that money, for example, for an upcoming election? I mean, I think the optics of it, and I'm wondering how you would respond to that, would not sit particularly well with some Canadians.
Well, again, this is my day job. I'm a volunteer. I can tell you that the entity that I work for, the National Bank, is not taking the wage subsidy. That's the only thing I can talk to about that issue. So.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate your time tonight.
All right. Thanks, Vashi.
Conservative Leadership Organizing Committee co-chair Dan Nolan. I want to bring you a snapshot of the spread of COVID-19 in this country right now. As we speak, there are 82,452 confirmed cases of the virus in Canada. More than 42,000 Canadians, however, have recovered. So far, 6,300 deaths in this country are linked to the virus. Let's take a look at the global picture now. As you can see, more than 5.1 million cases of COVID-19 reported around the world. The death toll tops 336,000 people. We have a lot more coming up on Power and Politics, including a special panel to dig into what we just heard about the Conservative leadership race. Will Jim Karahalios' will the fact that he got kicked out change the race at all, or will it backfire on them? Strategists are with us right after this. Hi there, I'm Vashi Capellos. This is Power and Politics on CBC News Network. You can catch our live stream on the CBC News app as well as CBCNews.ca. I want to welcome viewers joining us on their local stations in Ontario and Quebec. Good to have you with us on this Friday evening. We were just talking about the Conservative Party's decision to kick candidate Jim Karahalios out of the race for a second time. He was initially removed after candidate Erin O'Toole accused him of making racist remarks. So did the party's leadership make the right decision on disqualifying him, or should the membership have had a say? Let's bring in two people who have long been involved in Conservative politics in this country. Jamie Watt is the executive chairman of Navigator Limited. He joins us from Toronto. Kate Harrison is a consultant with Summa Strategies, and she's in Ottawa this evening. Hey guys, great to see you.
Hey, Vashi, good to see you.
Jamie, let me start with you. I don't know what you could hear of Mr. Nolan's interview, but he contends that it's Mr. Karahalios who got himself kicked out of this race. In fact, if he had paid the fine and not appealed the decision in the first place, he could still be a candidate. Mr. Karahalios, I imagine, given I spoke with him earlier this week, would not say that that's the case. He felt that the party had it out from him from the beginning. What do you think?
Well, Mr. Karahalios is the gift that keeps on giving. You know, I've actually read the 56-page decision, or at least sped read it, thanks to Evelyn Wood. And I can tell you the judge was pretty clear that it was that the LEOC had the ability to do it. They just went about it the wrong way. But here's the real problem, actually. This is a race that can't get arrested midday in the middle of King and Bay in downtown Toronto. No one is paying attention to this race. And when they get some attention, it's for all the wrong reasons. So once again, news cycle after news cycle are being paid attention to about all the things except those that are advancing an alternative for a different way to run Canada. And that's the real tragedy for this race. They don't have any attention to spare on nonsense like this.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Kate, because earlier this week, I mean, the argument that Mr. Karahalios was also putting forward was, hey, other candidates have said terrible things too. The example I put to Mr. Nolan is, of course, what Derek Sloan said about Dr. Tam, which was widely criticized as being racist. It's got to say something when the argument is, hey, I'm not the only one who said something like this.
Yeah, it's not a very inspiring lens to view the race, for sure. And I do agree with Jamie that I think there's a lot of Conservative members that would like to see more time spent on ideas rather than some of the foibles that the various campaigns have made. When it comes to Jim Karahalios, I do think that LEOC made the right decision. Mr. Karahalios has always been more of a martyr than somebody actually aspiring to be a leader of a political party. I think that the LEOC committee absolutely made the right decision, and it does show that you cannot just say these things without any kind of consequence. And there were various points along the way where he could have righted the wrong. He could have apologized. He could have paid the fine. He didn't take any of those opportunities. So obviously LEOC's hand was forced, and I think that they made the right decision.
Jamie, to your point about sort of the overall appetite for what's happening in this race, what needs to happen in order to change the dial on that?
Well, it's tough, right? Because first of all, this is not a race that Canadians are preoccupied with. They're appropriately preoccupied with the response to COVID-19, keeping their families safe, getting back to work, getting their businesses open, and things that are much more important than this particular leadership race. So then you say to yourself as a strategy, if that's the cards I've been dealt and that's the situation I'm in, you know, what can I do? Well, I can tell you what you do. You better have a really sharp, crisp campaign bursting with ideas and bursting with alternatives to give someone to think about. One more day of these process stories of people running silly ads against each other or making mistakes or campaigns that can't spell right or whatever else is going on is just making it easier and easier for the Prime Minister. Like, it's not surprising he's got, I think, the last poll I saw, a 14-point lead out of all of this.
Okay, I want to play for you an example of one of those ads. I want to sort of get a sense from both of you of particularly the campaigns of Erin O'Toole and Peter MacKay and where you think they're headed. Let's play a recent ad for an Erin O'Toole ad aimed at Peter MacKay. Let's take a look.
Peter MacKay cannot beat Justin Trudeau. He just can't handle the pressure. He even walked out of a television interview when he didn't like the questions he was getting.
$100 and some odd dollars in yoga expenses?
No, it isn't. And that was something that happened that I'm not proud of.
I
think we're done. You just went way off. We'd like to stop the interview.
And under pressure from the media, MacKay deleted and replaced a tweet that praised the actions of counter-protesters who were trying to clear an illegal blockade. If MacKay can't handle the pressure of a leadership campaign, how is he going to handle Justin Trudeau and the Liberals?
Kate, let me start with you. What does this tell you about Erin O'Toole's approach right now?
It feels very much, Vashi, like a message that the second place team would be putting out there right now. And I'm not saying that Peter MacKay's campaign has been perfect, because we just saw a bunch of examples where that obviously wasn't the case. But I do think that there is a sense that O'Toole is kind of nipping at the heels of MacKay. A lot of the polling that's come out this week suggests that MacKay does have an advantage, but not so much of an advantage that Erin O'Toole couldn't beat him further down the ballot. So I'm kind of surprised we haven't seen this attack come up before now, to be blunt. I think we didn't see it in the last leadership race because the number of people in the race there were so many that it was almost impossible to land attacks successfully on one another. But I think there will be more of where this came from if I were to look into a crystal ball.
Do you think there will be too, Jamie? And what do you think it says about the direction of Mr. O'Toole's campaign, and what do you think about the direction of Mr. MacKay's?
Well, leadership races are about choice, right? You can't have a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B. And when essentially you've got a race that's down more or less to two people, you're going to choose one or the other. So these kinds of ads aren't surprising. I mean, I think the challenge, of course, for the O'Toole campaign is that's pretty thin gruel. I mean, if that's the best you've got to attack Peter with, I mean, it's probably what you have to do, but you certainly would hope to have a little bit bigger snowballs in your arsenal.
I have to ask both of you quickly before we go about the story that broke this afternoon, and this is more widely a political party story, that all three political parties are accessing the federal wage subsidy. And in particular, Kate, I want to ask you about the Conservative Party only because it does seem pretty counterintuitive to the Conservatives, given the line of questioning that they've had around, well, the Liberals might have to raise your taxes to pay for all this help that's racking up right now. I mean, they haven't they've been supportive of some of the aid measures for sure, but they're raising that question quite frequently. And now we find out that, in fact, actually part of the grand tally of aid that's being given out is actually being given to their party. To your party.
Yeah, no, I understand that comment. And at the same time, what Conservatives have been pushing for, to your point, Vashi, is expanded eligibility for a number of programs, the small business account and others. When it comes to the wage subsidy, I do think that political parties, if they can get off it quickly, should. But at the same time, if it's good for one, I think it probably should be good for all, because it is not realistic nor fair to expect that one party would be okay to dip into their war chest for a potentially imminent campaign, depending on who you're talking to, and then be at a disadvantage for that election period, while the others collect the wage subsidy and don't need to tap into that. So my personal view is that if it's going to be good for one party, it should be good for all.
If it's bad for one party, should it be bad for all, Jamie? I mean, I just hear from so many Canadians every day who are so frustrated with their own inability to access federal help. And already I'm getting inundated with emails from people who are just stunned that political parties are among them. Yeah,
I can just say for the Conservatives, I have one word for it. I think it's dumb. I just think it's a stupid thing to do. They're constantly criticizing people for successful corporations for taking advantage of environmental programs and so forth and so on. Now they're doing exactly the thing that they've stood up in the House of Commons and condemned time and time again. And I just don't think it makes any sense. They constantly trumpet their fundraising expertise and success, and I think this is counterintuitive to it. I just can't. I just don't know who's in charge there anymore, making decisions like that. Dumb.
Okay, well, on that positive, happy Friday note, another one in our show tonight. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks, guys. A real pleasure to have you both back on the program. Jamie Watt and Kate Harrison.
Have a great weekend.
Thanks.
You guys too. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.